Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andres Restart, and this time we are talking about some pretty big news regarding the future of the Pokemon series. Many of you may be aware of the big issues at hand with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. When those games came out, and even now today, they are filled with glitches and performance issues left and right. It's not uncommon to run into a number of game-breaking bugs. It's very clear these games were rushed to market and didn't have to come out when they did, especially when they already had a successful mainline game that came out earlier that year in Legends Arceus. Yet they came out with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet anyway. They didn't delay it to improve on things and make sure it was polished, and many people have been very much aware of this, and it's been a topic of conversation throughout the year how much issues these games have. Well, it was so bad that Nintendo of America acknowledged this and said, "We take the feedback from players seriously and will continue to work on improvements to the games." And we have gotten some updates, but overall there still are a number of issues. And let's not pretend Scarlet and Violet are the beginning of these issues. We've had issues with Pokemon for some time. A lot of the mainline Pokemon games on Switch have suffered with a number of performance issues and are clearly in need of optimizations. And yet we still get new content every year. I mentioned Legends Arceus, but Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, a game that they outsourced to get a remake out for the holidays, came out just 2 months prior. We're seeing situations where they're putting out mainline Pokemon games coming out more often than a year. So they're putting out a lot of content, and it's clear that they could be saving this content. Yet, they don't. Except we now have news straight from Pokemon Company themselves that there will be some changes. But before we get into that, let me point out that we are aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. With your help, it just might be possible. So in a recent interview with comicbook.com, Chief Operating Officer of the Pokemon Company, Takato Utsunomiya, had this to say. "I think in general, if you look at the path we've taken up till now has been this constant release, always regularly releasing products on a fairly fixed kind of cadence, you might say. Always having these products able to be introduced and new experiences for our customers, and that's how we've operated up until now. I think we're still operating in that way, but there's more and more conversations as the development environments change about how we can continue to do this while making sure that we're ensuring really quality products are also being introduced." So here we have someone very high up in Pokemon Company that is acknowledging the frequency of releases they come out with and the challenges of doing that while also maintaining quality. And they are saying that they are having conversations about what they can do to ensure quality in the future. And this is why I explained the circumstances early on, the context of the situation. Because, yes, we are getting Pokemon games frequently. If there's a year where we don't have a mainline release, there's DLC instead, which I would say is a step in the right direction because that's not as much effort to be done in that particular year. But still, they continue to put out content consistently, and as nice as that can be, when it comes at the cost of quality, and we see performance issues, and graphical problems, and bugs that can break our games and experiences, you gotta slow down, or something needs to change. And I would say hearing this directly from Pokemon Company as opposed to Nintendo is fairly significant, because Nintendo and Pokemon Company operate separately. Yes, Nintendo owns a part of Pokemon, yes, Pokemon is a part of Nintendo, but Pokemon Company and Gamefreak, they operate independently of Nintendo. So the quality issue, well, you could maybe blame Nintendo for this to some extent, because maybe they could step in and go the extra mile to make sure they do something about it. This comes down to how Gamefreak and Pokemon Company do things. And it may be the case that since Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Nintendo has internally approached Pokemon Company and Gamefreak and addressed the issue, and maybe that's why now we are hearing about high-up executives from Pokemon Company also addressing the issue and making some level of suggestion that changes are at hand here. But perhaps the bigger question is, are changes actually coming? Are there any changes already in effect? Because an executive can say something, and those are just words. Actions matter more. Well, I have noticed a few changes with how Pokemon Company has been handling things that's a bit different than before. So something that I would say is pretty major is the timing of the Pokemon anime. So typically, the Pokemon anime follows the same timeline as the mainline games, as does all their merchandising, which is why we've been under the impression all these years that the reason why every new generation comes every 3 years is because they're maintaining a consistent schedule for all their merchandising and such. There's a lot of money at hand here. There's a lot of deals and agreements at hand here. They have to stick to the schedule. With the mainline video games being the core canon to it all, it's important that they get out before all these other things, or at least by the time all these other things are coming out. And if you take a look at the initial air dates for the new generation seasons of the anime, they always coincide with the release of the big brand new generation game. The Pokemon anime Sun and Moon came out November 2016, same time as the Pokemon games Pokemon Sun and Moon. For Pokemon Sword and Shield, that released in November of 2019, the anime that came alongside of it, Pokemon Journeys, also had its initial air date November 2019. But interestingly, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet came out last holiday of 2022, yet the anime that's meant to coincide with the new generation did not have its initial air date until April of 2023, almost a half year later. It may be the case that they are now changing the direction of the anime, so the anime isn't held to a strict schedule to where the video games are at, or vice versa. They perhaps can operate a bit independently of each other, while still in some ways managing to do some level of cross-promotion, but it's not so strict. This may also have something to do with the fact that Ash is now retired as the main character of the series, and we're moving on with a few other characters in Pokemon Horizons. So I would say this bodes well. If the games aren't going to be held to a strict schedule with the anime and potentially other merchandising, then this may give Game Freak some flexibility in terms of when they can release their games. And something else that's going on that I notice is a bit interesting is that in the recent June Nintendo Direct, we saw Pokemon games shown off during the Direct. Now, it isn't to say that there aren't Pokemon games that are shown off in Directs. This does happen, but typically when it comes to mainline Pokemon games, if they're shown off, it's few and far between, and nothing too major. But for this June Nintendo Direct, they showcased not only a significant trailer for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's DLC, but also for Detective Pikachu Returns. It was the official announcement reveal for Detective Pikachu Returns, but they finally officially unveiled it in a Nintendo Direct and not in a Pokemon Presents. It's possible that Nintendo may now be stepping in a bit more and working a little bit more closely with Pokemon Company to ensure that there's more quality, but also including them in their primary marketing of the Directs. Now, while we may be seeing some steps here, I think it's important to note that there are still signs that a mainline release is coming out next year. But at least instead of coming out with a new game every single year, we are now seeing consistently that they're focusing on DLC instead. And unlike last generation, where the first wave of DLC came out in the summer, this first wave of DLC is coming out this September. They've waited a little bit more time. It does look like they're trying to space things out just a bit more. When they did bring out Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, it was outsourced. It was made by a different developer. Game Freak focused on Legends Arceus, and they had a couple more months of extra time to work on that game, and that is the highest quality Pokemon game we've seen released on Nintendo Switch, at least from a critical acclaim perspective. It has the highest review scores, and I also think many of you watching this video may agree. It's a pretty darn good game for Pokemon standards. And if we also factor in that reports are suggesting that a Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be releasing the second half of 2024, it raises some questions as to when we're going to see the next generation of Pokemon. Typically, we don't see new mainline Pokemon games release until a new platform's been out for a few years. They usually focus on the prior console, and because the new console is backwards compatible, people still play the Pokemon games on their new systems. But they like to wait until the install base is a bit higher so those Pokemon games can sell pretty darn well. If Switch 2 comes out holiday 2024 or sometime in the second half of 2024, considering that the timing of things would suggest that the next generation of Pokemon will happen in holiday 2025, that may be too soon for Pokemon Company standards to release a next generation game on a system with perhaps a fairly small install base, with it only being out for about a year. So they more likely may want to wait until the second year to put out a whole-on next generation of Pokemon, which may give us some reason to think that for the first time in a long time, we may have a 4-year gap for Pokemon generations, as opposed to 3 years as we've seen for the last several Pokemon generations. But that is just my speculation. At the very least, we now have an official quote from the Chief Operating Officer of the Pokemon Company, suggesting that they're at least having conversations about what they can do to ensure good quality in future Pokemon products. But what do you guys make of this news? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.